Jeff Bezos and the Washington Post just ended Kamala Harris's career, and the mainstream media is going crazy over it. So what did they do? Well, they simply refused to endorse a presidential candidate for the first time since the 1980s. So here's Media Buzz host Howard Kurtz foaming at the mouth over the news. Watch.
The publisher and CEO, President Harris, the first Democrat in almost 40 decades, as I just mentioned, to not get the backing of the Washington Post. And you just heard Jose say, you know, who cares, right? I mean, it's a paper endorsement, doesn't necessarily move the needle. But it is interesting that they chose this moment to stay neutral. And they say, at least at this point, that they're going to stay neutral in races in the future. A lot of questions about Jeff Bezos, the owner of the paper, why they decided to do this. The publisher and CEO, William Lewis, wrote this, quote, "Our job as the newspaper of the capital city of the most important country in the world is to be independent. And that is what we are going to be." Let's bring in Media Buzz host Howie Kurtz, who previously worked at the Washington Post for nearly 3 decades. Howie, great to have you back today. What do you make of this?
Look, this is a profile in non-courage. It's an absolute wimping out. Now, Jeff Bezos does have the right to do this, but at the same time, the other 364 days a year, the liberal Washington Post tells us what to think about everything, every issue under the sun. And all of a sudden comes down to the most important question. It's like, oh, we couldn't possibly give you our opinion now. And so I just think Jeff Bezos, by the way, does a lot of business with the federal government through his rocket company, through Amazon. And he may fear that Trump is going to win, and he doesn't want to exacerbate their already testy relationship.
You know, I do find it interesting, though, how many entities have decided to stay on the sidelines in this particular race, who do usually put down a marker, as we just saw the New York Post today do for President Trump. The Washington Post, no endorsement. Los Angeles Times sort of kicked this off with no endorsement. South Florida Sun Sentinel. And then you've got some of the unions, Howie, that have also decided to stay on the sidelines, maybe wisely, because they tend to be different than the bodies that they oversee. Look at this from Marty Baron. This is cowardice, with democracy as its casualty. Real Donald Trump will see this as an invitation to further intimidate owner Jeff Bezos. Disturbing spinelessness at institution famed for courage, he says. Your reaction?
Marty Baron ran the paper during the Trump presidency, and obviously he's upset. In both cases, LA Times and Washington Post, there were editorials drafted favoring Kamala Harris, and the billionaire owner of the LA Times not only killed it, but 3 top editors have now resigned in protest. A bunch of people have canceled their subscriptions. So the idea that, oh, we don't want to be divisive, and this is, you know, it's up to our readers to make up their minds. Sure, most newspaper editorials don't matter much anymore. But it is interesting that they are pulling back on this, the most important decision of the year, after they've lectured us all on every issue. They've been anti-Trump mostly, more recently largely pro-Kamala Harris, and yet both of the owners are saying, well, I run the place, and you're not running that Harris endorsement.
Howie, thank you. Just on the way out here, this just crossed that Washington Post editorial board member Robert Kagan has confirmed to Fox that he has resigned over this decision not to endorse. And just as a side note, he is Victoria Nuland's husband. Nuland was Biden-Harris's Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs. Couple second thought on that, Howie?
Well, he's an influential guy, a scholar, and the fact that he is now resigning shows there's a backlash to this, even for people who don't care about newspaper editorials. It's just hypocrisy, in my view.
Now, let's be real here for a second, guys. Who would vote for this train wreck of a campaign, right? Let alone endorse it. I mean, have they listened to Kamala Harris speak? She can't give one serious answer without saying Donald Trump. Seriously, guys, my uncle says she's horrible. Me, I just want to tell Kamala Harris to stop blaming Trump for her own failures. You know what I mean, guys? But yeah, and so now we're seeing the American people finally starting to come to their senses, and the tide is turning in Donald Trump's favor. And let me tell you guys, the Democrats are running scared. Watch.
She's actually imploding, if you take a look. Because, look, I'm not supposed to say it, but we are leading by so much. They think she is grossly incompetent, let's face it. She's not doing well. We can't have her as president. Can't have. We've had that for 4 years. We're not going to go another 4 years.
Former President Trump lambasting the state of the Harris campaign. This amid a series of headlines saying Democrats are growing more doubtful about her chances.
Kamala Harris herself is running scared. She's even mentioning Donald Trump in every sentence now, especially since she has no other ideas. She's done. Could this be the very reason why we're getting record turnouts in the polls as early voting has begun in America?
Just over a week out from Election Day, but already 30 million Americans have already cast their ballots, including millions of ballots cast in swing states. Polling is showing that, this race is coming down to the wire, but at the same time, we're seeing folks like CNN's polling guru Harry Enton suggest that we could have an electoral college blowout. I know Nate Silver has suggested that is a strong possibility. Do you really think that there is a chance here that we could have an electoral college blowout for one of these candidates?
I guess it is possible. We know that going back to 2016, there have been a lot of questions about polling. There are questions right now about whether the polling zone, if you will, has been flooded with more Republican and right-leaning polls. So it's, there's a lot of questions as to what will happen. But if you just look at the majority of polls that we've seen, the majority of them are showing a very, very tight race, not only nationally, but within these battleground states. So I think from gathering that, we understand that it's going to be close. But I guess anything really could happen. There could be a big surprise in November, but it seems that most people I talk to at least think it's going to be close.
You know what really surprises me? That these polls are this tight. Seriously, guys, I really think Donald Trump's already winning this by a landslide. Just look at his opponent. Who knows what Kamala stands for? My uncle says she stands for whatever is the soup of the day. But yeah, guys, the real headline here is the Washington Post killing their own Kamala Harris endorsement. And really, guys, we all know, especially coming from such a liberal news outlet like Washington Post, this non-endorsement, it speaks volumes about their stone cold fear of a Trump win in November. Wouldn't you guys say? Now, I did a little bit of digging, and the news is actually so much bigger than Washington Post not endorsing Kamala Harris. So it turns out that it was their billionaire owner, Jeff Bezos, that personally made the decision to kill an endorsement of Vice President Kamala Harris for president that the newspaper editorial board had drafted. Two sources spoke up about this, and they were actually briefed on the sequence of events, so it's legit. Now, according to them, the Washington Post reported its editorial board had drafted an endorsement for Harris that was to be published before the election. Specifically, two Washington Post board members, Charles Lane and Stephen W. Stromberg, wrote the Harris endorsement. Then, David Shipley, the editorial page director, told the staff endorsement was on track, adding that this was obviously something their owner had an interest in. Then, the next thing that they know, Shipley was telling the board that there would be no endorsement, which was quickly followed up by Lewis's very weird editorial. NPR also reported Shipley had approved and then canceled this editorial, saying that Shipley told colleagues it was being reviewed by Bezos. And yes, the same sources confirmed that decision not to publish was made by the Post's owner, Amazon founder Jeff Bezos. And the backlash could not be any louder. In a note to readers, Post publisher Will Lewis, who Jeff Bezos hired earlier this year after the departure of former CEO Fred Ryan, said the company anticipated the backlash that it was receiving. They said that they recognize that this will be read in a variety of ways, including as a tacit endorsement of one candidate, or as a condemnation of another, or maybe even as an abdication of responsibility. Now, according to Lewis, that is inevitable, but they don't see it that way. Instead, they supposedly see it as consistent with the values the Post has always stood for. Still, the decision was widely criticized. Post staffers and outside observers couldn't stop blasting Bezos and Lewis for the move, especially considering how the Post has endorsed a candidate for president in every election dating back more than 30 years. I mean, we're talking back as far as like the 1980s, guys. So really, what does this non-endorsement of Kamala Harris tell you? That Amazon CEO Jeff Bezos is afraid of losing his business with the federal government once Trump wins? Because let's not forget, Jeff Bezos' other companies have contracts with the American government. Now, among them, Amazon's $10 billion cloud contract with the NSA and Blue Origin's $3.4 billion contract with NASA to build a lunar lander. Or maybe we should be thinking of this Washington Post non-endorsement as actually a Trump endorsement by default. All I know is that it definitely looks like Donald Trump's got this thing in the bag. Do you guys agree? Drop me a quick yes in the comment section down below, guys. Also, light up the like button to show your support. And while you guys are at it, don't forget to hit the subscribe button, tap that notification bell. That way you know as soon as new updates drop. You guys know why I'm so confident about a Trump win this November, right? It's because the liberals are going crazy, foaming at the mouth about this Washington Post non-endorsement. I mean, seriously, guys, newspaper endorsements? Who even reads the newspapers, right? But they're rarely a big deal during election season. But Washington Post editorial staff are practically revolting over the fact that Jeff Bezos made the decision to cut Kamala Harris's endorsement. Now, from what I read, editor-at-large Robert Kagan, who has warned in columns of Donald Trump dictatorship, has resigned, and insiders predict more would follow. Now, apparently, anonymous sources are saying that this editorial board was in the dark on the decision up until it was actually announced. So now people are saying that they're furious and that it's frightful when a billionaire does not have the nerve to stand up to Donald Trump. Now, at the same time that Washington Post publisher and CEO Will Lewis announced the decision in a Friday column, the newspaper published a story citing anonymous sources saying editorial page staffers had already drafted a Kamala Harris endorsement that had yet to be published. From there, the newspaper's editorial guild posted a statement saying Lewis's decision raised concerns that management interfered with the editorial department and readers were canceling their subscriptions. Woo! Now, I've even seen some posts on X from people canceling their subscriptions in protest about the news. But what about you guys? Now, the comment most quoted so far is from retired WAPO executive editor Marty Barron saying that the decision is cowardice with democracy as its casualty. He even added how Donald Trump will celebrate this as an invitation to further intimidate the Post owner, Jeff Bezos, and other media owners. He said that history will mark a disturbing chapter of spinelessness at an institution famed for courage. Now, again, yet another Donald Trump is a threat to democracy line like we've seen before, right? Now, what can I say? I guess even billionaires and their news outlets are falling in line and they're kind of paving the way for a Trump presidency. In fact, the Los Angeles Times, a fellow liberal newspaper for the Washington Post, was the first one to bend the knee. The outlet endorsed statewide candidates but declined to endorse a presidential candidate this year, even prompting 3 staff resignations. It just kind of goes to show that these mainstream media news outlets are just really a soapbox for these billionaire owners. You know what I'm saying? Make no mistake, these companies, they're all the same. The LA Times and the Washington Post they're just a handful of news outlets in addition to Time and the Boston Globe that have been acquired in recent years by billionaires who made their money in other areas. I guess part of the whole billionaire as a newspaper savior fantasy that they were trying to portray to the public. But yeah, guys, if you guys remember, Jeff Bezos and Donald Trump have feuded over the years. In fact, the Post saw liberal subscriptions just soar when it started pursuing aggressive reporting on Donald Trump's administration and launched the advertising tagline, "Democracy dies in darkness." I guess that's proof that Trump derangement syndrome is a real thing, right, guys? For his part, Trump has mocked Bezos and the Washington Post. The former president has even called the Amazon CEO Jeff Bezos classic. Still, Bezos shared words of support after the July shooting at a Trump rally. Now, again, this is now the second American newspaper after the Los Angeles Times to kill a Harris endorsement at the owner's instruction. In his part, Times owner Patrick Soon-Shiong similarly blocked the planned endorsement. Their editorial's editor even resigned because of it. Similarly, the Post's union says that it's deeply concerned that the paper would do it just 11 days before an immensely consequential election. They said that the message from their chief executive, Will Lewis, not from the editorial board itself, makes them concerned that management has interfered with the work of our members in editorial. But yeah, guys, even the Washington Post seems to be falling in line, even after routinely publishing investigations into Donald Trump that allege wrongdoing and illegal behavior. So what does that say to you guys about their prospects for a Trump reelection? Yeah, definitely seems like they're bowing and they're bending the knee to our former president, right, guys? But when you really zoom out and you look at the bigger picture, you know what all these non-endorsements really mean? It's that U.S. newspaper endorsements for the Democratic presidential candidate have dipped by more than 60% this year since 2016 after VP Kamala Harris became the party's frontrunner. So here are the numbers. In 2016, more than 240 newspapers endorsed Hillary Clinton. Meanwhile, another 20 endorsed Donald Trump. In 2020, 14 newspapers endorsed Trump and 120 endorsed Biden. Are you guys starting to see the pattern? Well, this year, nearly 80 newspapers endorsed Harris and fewer than 10 endorsed Donald Trump. And Kamala Harris's list is an undeniable who's who of liberal news outlets. She's got the likes of Winston-Salem Chronicle, New York Times, Boston Globe, The New Yorker, Denver Post, the Las Vegas Sun, Los Angeles Sentinel, Seattle Times, the Star-Ledger, Tennessee Tribune, Scientific American, and even San Antonio Express. What did I tell you guys? Literally, the liberal media bus is trying to hitch a ride on a Kamala Harris' struggle bus of a campaign. Meanwhile, endorsements for Donald Trump include more independent-minded newspapers like the New York Post, the Washington Times, and the Las Vegas Review-Journal. So I worked in the IT field for years, and luckily, I happen to work for a company where we do business with a lot of different vendors. And one of these vendors used to take us out to lunch on a very regular basis. Let's just say like maybe once a month, once every 2 months. But when I say they would take us out to lunch, they would take us out to lunch. I'm talking about they would take us to some of these really fancy restaurants that I would only hear about or I drive past them. But they were very expensive places. And I'll be honest with you guys, I just wasn't in a position where I was willing to pay that kind of money for food. They're very expensive. I'll just put it that way. Anyway, so one day we go to lunch and right around, it was a late lunch. So right around, I don't know, like 1:30, 2 o'clock, we're leaving and we're waiting for the car to be pulled up because they have mandatory valet. So anyway, while we're waiting for our car to get pulled up, I'm staring at this beautiful black Ferrari 458 and I'm like, wow, this thing is crazy. I don't even get to see those kind of cars often. I don't know if it's just me being a car guy, but I just wonder sometimes, like, how do people afford these things? So after the valet pulls the car up, the owner starts walking towards it and I just happen to say, hey man, that's a sharp car. So the owner turns around and says to me, thanks, I appreciate it. So then I say to him, since he seemed friendly, I was like, hey, is that your first Ferrari? So he turns around and he says, oh no, I have 6 more, but this is probably one of my favorite ones. I said 6 more? That response sparked a 2-minute conversation that I had with this guy. And let me tell you, what he shared with me in that brief 2-minute conversation completely changed my life. And it's life-changing conversations and lessons like this that I decided to share right inside of our Liberty Pursuit network. And to be honest with you, it really wasn't even so much the car that he was driving. It just made me think to myself, like, how does this guy just have the freedom to be able to live his life the way he did? Nice car, hanging out at a fancy restaurant in the middle of the afternoon. It really made me wonder, how do you do that? Anyway, when I was living paycheck to paycheck, I wish that I knew people like this that would kind of like let me know the inside scoop. So anyway, if you want to join like-minded people just like us, join us over in the Liberty Pursuit Network. I left a link for you guys in the description down below this video. Now again, she offers a whole lot of nothing here. And like clockwork, Donald Trump is at fault for everything that's wrong with America today. That he's the guy who wants to divide us. That the American dream is now out of reach because he was the president 4 years ago. Which is kind of amusing to say the least, because even Kamala Harris knows that it was their administration that killed that very dream.
And, you know, the idea of the American dream was something that previous generations could count on, not as much anymore.
She's right. There's no amount of propaganda that can change what's happened during her term. Because if things were great, the message should be one that continues the policies and the ideals of President Joe Biden. But instead, they're doing their best to defer the blame of their mistakes to Donald Trump. Something that's not working because I think they forgot to tell the president of their game plan. He's out there sinking Kamala Harris's campaign as we speak.
Obviously, been a number of crises that the country has been facing over the past several days with the hurricane, with the port strike, with the situation in the Middle East. Can you talk about how your vice president, who is running for the presidency, has worked on these crises and what role she has played over the past several days?
Well, I'm in constant contact with her. She's aware we're singing from the same song sheet. She helped pass all the laws that are being employed now. She was a major player in everything we've done, including passage of legislation which we were told we could never pass. And so she's been, and her staff is interlocked with mine in terms of all the things we're doing.
Well, there you have it, folks. It's no wonder that they're losing the support of the working class, because the working class is sick and tired of being lied to. Kamala Harris would have you believe that she's going to do something that's different from Joe Biden. But the president, her own boss, is telling us that this is not the case, and that this could very well be an extension of the Joe Biden presidency, which could equate to a 4th term for former President Barack Obama, or so they say. Now, it's also not a good look to have the endorsement of the individuals who are mostly pro-war. Guys, I'm talking about the likes of Dick and Liz Cheney. Donald Trump, on the other hand, has been talking about bringing peace to the global stage. But if you ask Kamala Harris, he's going about things the wrong way.
This concept of isolation, we were once there as a nation, and then Pearl Harbor happened. Let's remember, recent history. Europe remembers it well. When we got attacked, Pearl Harbor, we jumped in. And it is because America jumped in that we were ultimately able to win that war. And it should be a constant reminder to us, we have to remember history, that isolationism, which is exactly what Donald Trump is pushing, pull out of NATO, abandon our friends, isolationism is not insulation. It is not insulation. It will not insulate us from harm in terms of our national security. So I say that to emphasize a point that the Congresswoman made.
So I guess that's why we're helping out Ukraine and all these other countries with billions of dollars in funding and weapons, right? But at the same time, you got veterans struggling to find a home, people on Social Security struggling to pay for their needs. Now, with that being said, do any of you guys believe that this war is the answer to our problems? Or should they instead focus on putting Americans first? Now, speaking of which, billionaire ex-CEO Elon Musk is thinking about the American people right now. In fact, he's giving away $1 million a day to random people who sign a petition in Pennsylvania. I mean, just take a look at any Kamala Harris interview where they talk about the economy or immigration. She always says that Trump's at fault for what's happened during their term.
One of your campaign themes is we're not going back. But I wonder what you say to voters who do want to go back when it comes to the economy specifically, because their groceries were less expensive, housing was more affordable when Donald Trump was president.
Well, let's start with the fact that when Joe Biden and I came in office, during the height of a pandemic, we saw over 10 million jobs were lost. People, I mean, literally, we were all tracking the numbers. Hundreds of people a day were dying because of COVID. The economy had crashed. In large part, all of that because of mismanagement by Donald Trump of that crisis.
When you become president, what would be your specific steps? Yeah, of course. What would be specific steps to strengthening the border?
So it's a wonderful and important question. You know, my background was as a prosecutor, and I was also the elected attorney general for 2 terms of a border state. So this is not a theoretical issue for me.
But it's going to take a lot of fake reports to convince these people otherwise. Nayara was quoted in saying that he looked us in the eye. The way he communicated with us, the way he greeted my children in the backseat, it was incredible. My kids were saying, I can't believe I shook Donald Trump's hand, which shows us how connected Donald Trump is to the people. And I gotta talk about AOC's insane comment about Elon Musk giving away $1 million a day to people who really need it. Now, again, I'm just gonna have to remind her that she is a supporter of taking money from rich folks. I think she even wore a dress specifically to say just that. But since it's Elon Musk that's doing it, she's suddenly changing her tone. She's now saying that it's a bad thing if billionaires give away money to struggling Americans. It's kind of like she can't even pick a side at this point. And it's hilarious coming from her given that she hasn't done anything for the working class. So it's kind of hypocritical to call out Donald Trump and Elon Musk for helping the American people when you yourself can't do it. And Musk isn't even working for the government. So yeah, now that we're getting a little bit closer and closer to the election, we're starting to see more and more of the people aligning themselves with the Democratic Party, and really, we're not that surprised. Are you guys? Drop a quick comment down below. Let me know what you guys think. Now, I also highly recommend subscribing to the channel and turning on that notification bell if you haven't already. Also, if you want to take it a step further and you want to join us over in our private community inside the Patreon group where you get early access to content, commercial free, and also exclusive content that unfortunately I can't release here, hit the link in the description down below. Click on the link for Patreon, join the community over there, and join the discussion. But also, I dropped a video recently where we talked about the Trump story that Kamala Harris and mainstream media are currently trying to hide. It's about the time where Donald Trump chartered a 727 plane to help fly Nelson Mandela, the revered anti-apartheid activist to the United States. And that's just the top of the list of Donald Trump's good deeds. Anyway, guys, make sure you check that video out after this one. Thanks so much for hitting the like button and sharing this video. I'll see you guys next time.